You're listening to ABA On Call, hosted by myself, Rick Cabina, and Doug Kostowitz. This is your front row seat to the future of behavior analysis. Join us for fresh ideas, practical strategies, and bold conversations designed to inspire action. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ABA On Call. Doug, our last few podcasts have had a guest, and it's always fun talking to guests. This podcast, we have another guest, and this is a guest you're very familiar with, and I would like for you to introduce her.
That would be my pleasure. So this is Christina Sena. She's one of my special education doc students whose major focus is in applied behavior analysis. And she has lots of questions, and she comes and asks me those questions. And these most recent questions, usually we're asking questions of guests. And this time I thought, you know what? She's got some really good questions because she supervises BCBAs. She interacts with a lot of behavior analysts. And these are things that have come up between their discussions. So she comes and asks me, and I said, you know what? Why don't you ask me in front of everybody else? And let's see what Rick has to say. And because I bet other people would like to hear that as well. So why don't you introduce yourself and hit us with some of your questions?
Sure. Like Doug mentioned, I'm Christina Sena. It's an honor to be here. I am a doctoral student at the University of Pittsburgh. My research focuses on evidence-based practices and language skills and academic interventions in special education. And another interest of mine is providing high quality supervision to future behavior analysts. And so my first question today really is about mentorship. But before we dig into that, I wanted to acknowledge that I am lucky to be mentored by Doug, and Doug was lucky to be mentored by Rick. So we really have like
lucky.
a whole, well,
come on.
either way it happened.
All right.
But we have
This
a
is
whole
the
like,
mentorship
life cycle
cycle.
of the mentee here,
Absolutely.
which is
Okay.
pretty awesome.
It's beautiful.
True.
It is.
So my first question relates to mentorship, and mentorship, as you two can probably both attest to. Mentorship may be first contacted by BCBAs when they're doing their field work, their supervised field work. But mentorship shouldn't end there. Mentorship should be something that continues throughout our careers. But BCBAs, once we're certified, may not have a ready-made mentor just waiting for us. We may need to do some work to identify those learning opportunities or those mentorship opportunities. How can we do that? How can we seek out high-quality mentorship and skill development opportunities?
That's a good question. Let me just weigh in before I answer, think about that. And that is, when I think about a mentor, I reserve that term to someone that has a significant impact on your life. Like when I was a doctoral student, John Cooper was my mentor. And it was more than a doctoral dissertation advisor. I see a mentor as this revered person that helped me become who I am, that gave me all of this expertise and did more of the supervision. So I don't know what you all think. Is that the same role, that kind of mentorship that would happen when you're in the BCBA? Or is mentorship more just like someone that has the supervisory role? Doug, you're shaking your head. What do you think about this?
I like your division. I see you want to be supervised. So I'm thinking about, okay, addressing two things. One, how do you seek out quality supervision? Because that's important. And I think that first and foremost is looking for the knowledge that the individual has about what is required for the process. Are they implementing techniques that they're behavior analytic in nature? They may not have a total understanding, but they have an understanding of the things that they're working with you about. If they don't have an answer, they're willing to go find that answer. So there's that supervision aspect that you need. It's hard to find good supervisors that match with you. Sometimes they're not at where you work. And so stepping away from that. Now, Rick, I share with you that word mentor has a totally, it has an exponential effect above what a supervisor is. This is someone that is guiding you not just through behavior analysis, but maybe perhaps through your job, life choices, someone that you can go to when you're coming. So that's a harder thing to seek out. And I think that comes down to the success you have in interacting with them and then building trust as you would with any friend, colleague, moving from friend to best friend, that type of thing is moving from someone who supervises you to a mentor. At least I envision that.
I'm on that same page. Christina, what do you think about this? I mean, having, whether it's, so if we say we'll use mentorship right now, that term synonymously with more supervision, because this is talking about people that might need someone to help supervise them. And as Doug was saying, it's really hard to get a real mentor. I mean, you kind of luck into it, I think, is part of it. Maybe you can do some research and find someone by their reputation. But if we just hold it as this person who's going to supervise you, mentor you, at least in the BCBA, if we're think about it that way, that should be someone that has certain characteristics. And how do you find that person? I mean, this is something I'm sure you've thought about and worked on specifically.
Yeah, so I can speak from my own experience as a previous supervisee. I had and I won't say any names. I had one supervisor who was amazing, and I had one supervisor that was not so amazing. And after that not so amazing experience, what I started to do was kind of shop supervisors. So I would try to find people's resumes in CVs and look for alignment. And then if I knew someone else they had supervised that was incredibly skilled, I thought, okay, this person has the skills I would like to emulate. And oh, here's evidence potentially of their ability as a supervisor to cultivate that same skill set in someone else. And so I was very fortunate in that I was able to connect with someone who had the skills that I was interested in attaining, and she was willing to supervise me. As a supervisor, I have taken a lot of what that person modeled for me and tried to make sure that the supervision I provide is competency based and that we still bring everything back to a conceptual analysis. So there's no like, show up, I saw you work with a client, rubber stamp it, we're done. Like every interaction serves a purpose, and it serves a purpose in a way that is well defined and thoughtfully embedded into a scope and sequence of skills we're working, we're always building to complexity, whether it's with the students we serve or with the supervisees I mentor. But that seems to be some of the guiding principles that have helped me begin the work of trying to provide high quality supervision.
We have had guests on our podcast before. And if I think about like two ways that you might get someone who's good, if you interview people and ask them, have you read any books on mentorship, or are people just shooting from the hip, so to speak, where there's good ways to do quality mentorship, and people write books on this. And these resources suggest very structured ways that if you follow these steps and you stay within bounds of these particular procedures, then that's likely going to lead to high quality mentorship. And I guess the second thing I think about is if you go to social media and you ask people, sure, you could ask your peers, like, what do you think about so-and-so, and get that kind of personal recommendation. But on social media, people are pretty open about sharing their experiences. I mean, obviously you'd want to have some tact and maybe private message people, and you don't want to be getting this information out there. But I think through interviews and through asking around, those are probably two pretty good channels to figure out.
I want to go one step further. You also can look at an individual's lineage of who's mentored them, what models they've had, not to say that they're the best models, but you definitely can pick up on some of those skills. So for example, Rick, both of us, we shared Coupa at the same time, but then I came back and we worked together, and I pride myself on mentoring, advising with the opportunity to mentor students. It's very important to me that they do well. So when you're looking at individuals, what kind of lineage do they have through that process? Who has been their models along the way? So you might find someone that matches up research wise, but maybe they don't have those skills. They haven't chosen, like Rick said, taken a path to better themselves because maybe they didn't have the best models. So they might be worried more about other aspects if you look at competing contingencies there. So, so I see it as a combination of, does this person really want to better themselves, but also who have they been mentored by? Because there's a strong likelihood that they may share some of those skills and seen those successes.
Let me say, this is a very good question, a very relevant topic to everyone who's listening to this. Well, most people who are looking for that. I started off very early on in the early 2000s. So Doug and I, we both also took the tests at the same time. This goes to show how old we are. We took it, the second year after it was open. So, yeah, our number is like, I'm 801. What's your number?
800. I'm one better.
No, I should just write the BACB and demand I'm 800. And
it was alphabetical. It's KO, KU. See,
okay,
we took it the same time. Yeah.
But my point was, I did some supervision then, and I just stopped for the longest time because you get busy. And I'm back to, I'm not a lot of people, but I have one student I'm supervising, and it's really interesting. I think the supervisor gets a lot of benefit from this also if you do it right, because you're getting this information, you're being able to help problem solve. And if you're doing this a long time, then you can learn like, oh, I provided this feedback. They tried this. It did work. It didn't work. But I think supervision, this is a really good question. And it's something that we need to pay attention to. And if all of you are looking for a mentor, hopefully we've shared some information that benefits you.
That brings us to our first secret word, and that secret word is mentor.
Good choice, Doug, for a secret word.
All right. So, Christina, that wasn't the only question you had for us. You had two more. What is the second question you wanted to bring?
The second question I have for you today is about punishment and extinction. And it's part of a larger set of questions that we could delve into, but probably won't because they're a big set of questions around how behavior analysts represent and discuss our science in social media. Recently, I have seen folks in our field call for other practitioners to abandon the use of punishment or extinction in practice completely. However, that doesn't sit quite right with me. It's a little concerning, and I have talked to Doug a little bit about this, but I am interested in hearing from you as to why BCBAs may want to avoid blanket refusals to use punishment or extinction in practice.
Wow, that is a heck of a question. And,
sure is.
You know, Doug and I, well, I guess let's speak for each other. We've talked about this before, and you're right that this has become, not just recently within this last year, but maybe within the last, there's always been issues with punishment in how you do it. Let's just face it, in our field. It's Murray Sidman who wrote one of the, what would you call it, premier treatise on punishment, coercion, and its fallout. This, when was that book published? Was it, is that
89?
Yeah, so it's 89. We've been grappling with this for a long time. And first off, we know that this is part of the environment. Yeah. Secondly, this is something that if you make blanket statements about it, you could run into all sorts of trouble. So I recently was reading something from Sidman, and he says, look, this is, again, the guy that wrote this seminal book, and he mentioned that there can be true emergencies. And again, when we talk about punishment, there's type 1 punishment or positive punishment, type 2, and negative punishment. And if we're talking type 1 punishment, positive punishment, even then there can be instances where, what if your child's reaching for a stove? Or what if your child is about to run out in front of a car? Or what if your child is going to do something dangerous to their sibling? In those cases, you might reach out with a sudden force to restrain the person, or you might raise your voice, or you might physically block the person. Those are all instances of type 1. In someone's going to say to me as a parent, I can't do that in those situations. So you need to be exceptionally careful that we don't make these blanket statements. And yes, we can talk about the many cases where punishment is not appropriate, and where we can even talk about all the baggage that comes with punishment. But I think just out of the gate, that would be one thing that I would want people to consider.
As a behavior analyst, you need all the tools at your disposal, right? You've got to be able to understand what's going on. So a blanket statement to say, I'm never going to use something, okay, versus there are very few instances that are ethically, we could use it because it's safer than any other process. If you're blanketly removing it, then you're not necessarily potentially giving the most ethical treatment to the individual. Also, you have to understand it. It's a process. It's there. People behaviors decline. That means punishment is in effect or extinction is in effect. And you have to be able to understand and analyze this. I thoroughly agree. We shouldn't be programming something like shock for disrespect, right? That makes absolutely no sense. But that should be brought up in the teaching of it, right? And understanding of it. So that if you blanketly remove things, then people aren't going to understand it over time. People aren't going to understand how I can use this to make the most ethical decision for my client or guidance. You won't have all the tools at your ability, and not understanding that punishment is out there. Coercion is everywhere, right? We respond to it and nobody's making it happen. But, and by the way, Rick, just as an aside, and hopefully this is a side of things to come, I want to do coercion as fallout as a book review. So that's a future podcast right there. But yeah, it's interesting because so much of our legal system is inherently based on punishment, but yet nobody says we shouldn't be doing that. Why should we? And I'm not saying we should. So you got to take it with a grain of salt, but we have an entire legal system based on punishment. Nobody says to them they shouldn't use it. Why is that?
Well,
What?
I would push back against that. You remember
You
when we read
can,
Skinner's
please.
book, the Walden 2?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I'm saying we have a legal system. Response cost is all over the place. You see also
Sure.
in history. I'm just saying it's there and it's programmed, and people are discussing how to make it more punishing. Now there's the two different, there's the actual effect of punishment, and then what people call punishment that may not be acting like punishment. So those are two different things there. But I'm not saying we need to program it, but understanding it and not dismissing it outright is a big difference.
Doug, if I may, just to elaborate on something you said, I think you're spot on in that If you say that you don't use it and you don't acknowledge it, it may indicate that you don't have a good analysis of it. And if that's the case, then I also can't acknowledge someone else's history of punishment. Maybe the learner I'm working with had some trauma history. And so I show up and I'm my loud, vivacious self, but loud noises are conditioned aversives from this trauma history. And now the kid's like cowering when they see me, and all I was trying to tell them how great of a job they did. Well, I inadvertently punished that great performance they just delivered. But if I don't understand punishment, then I'm not going to be aware of that. And if we say we're not going to use things like extinction, then we have abandoned a multiplicity of ways that we can help engender variability in student responding, because the effects of extinction are variability. If we're working with kids that need to vary their social responses, then, knowing what the schedule of reinforcement was for those responses and holding out, using extinction that way in a skill development way rather than a behavior decelerative fashion is an incredible tool for us as instructors, and one that can help us avoid providing prompts that students are later dependent upon. So if we don't have those analyses of these core conceptual elements in our science, then it really does abbreviate how well we can serve our learners and how invasive are the instructional methods that we're likely to employ.
Can't use extinction. What are you going to do with differential reinforcement?
Couldn't tell you to save my life. Best of luck shaping.
I mean, it's inherent in the definition, right?
Yep.
Differential reinforcement. So you want to reinforce, you're going to put something else on extinction. That's
how it works.
Extinction, right?
There was a paper that came out, I should remember who wrote it because I just spoke to him, but it was, and I can't remember the name, but it was like caring extinction, or that's not the term, but you know what I'm talking about?
Was it Tarbox?
Yes, Jonathan. And a very great paper. And just to give you the rough outlines, what they're showing is extinction doesn't have to be done like you're a jerk. Like if you have a child that, like, you can be empathetic. Like if you have a young children, yes, there are times hey, can I have some Nutella? Can I have some Nutella? Can I have some Nutella? At some point, having extinction there versus, giving that attention or whatever, that's going to be a good strategy. But you can still within that interject, oh, I'm sorry, it's not lunchtime yet. Like you don't need to be a jerk about it. You don't need to turn your back on the kid and just be. And I think that's something where the field can evolve into how extinction, this is just a principle that happens. Socially, this happens all the time. If any of you have ever been to a bar, if you've ever dated and someone is just not giving you attention, that's just part of how we function as creatures. And it's okay. And, there can be some ways that if you're going to use this, that can be done in a thoughtful, caring way. I'll just say one last thing. Again, thinking back when we were talking about punishment, we could go on and spend an entire podcast on it because it's such an important issue. And people that are responding to it are saying, like Christina, when you're talking about folks out there, they're responding from a place of compassion, and they don't want people just indiscriminately punishing people, because when you punish, it works well. You fall into this cycle where you want to do it more, but it doesn't teach anything. And that's the very hard part. So I understand where people are coming from when they categorically say, hey, let's not do this and this. I understand where they're coming from. But as a science, it's very helpful for us to understand what are its effects, how can we do things better, and in what cases should we absolutely not do it. We didn't talk about spanking. We didn't talk about all of these things that would just be very poor ways of parenting. Same thing in schools, corporal punishment. There can be a humane, compassionate way that we can do these things, and keeping that conversation going, I feel, is something we need to do in our field because the stakes are high.
I want to add one thing. Just because an aversive happens, we lose the effect. So if it doesn't decrease, then that aversive is just the aversive, right? If the behavior The behavior should cease if punishment is effective. So when you were talking about people who talk about, people implement these things out there and they don't affect behavior, but they're aversive. And that's very, very problematic. So, all right. So that brings us to our second word, and that word is punish.
Okay.
All right. So you have a third question for us, Christina. And this one I just heard about recently.
I sure do. And so my question is about something that may have felt a bit punishing to some, and it may have punished their podcast listening behavior. Recently, the BACB provided specific guidance that listening to podcasts are not appropriate activities for the accrual of supervised fieldwork hours. Do you have any insight as to why that may be? Or, and again, this isn't affecting certified folks. Like, we certificates can still, to the best of my knowledge, get RCEUs via podcast. So it's still okay for continuing ed, but it's not okay for people that are in supervision and not yet certified. So if you can shed any light on this, it would be so instructive for me and many listeners out there.
All right, I'll go first, but I'm going to tell you that this is all speculation. I have no inside information. I was informed of this in teaching class the other day because I say, hey, you know what? There's these two guys I know that do this podcast that have some cool topics that I hear they're pretty professional and they're fun to listen to. And hey, it counts for supervision hours. And one looked at me and goes, no, it doesn't. And I said, no. And I found out it didn't. So that got me thinking. And and again, this is speculation, but this is not a controlled medium, right? No, there's no peer review on what we talk about. And I'm using this as the royal we, the big we in podcasts. Nobody's controlling the content. And unlike a journal article that has to go through peer review, and I'm not even saying that that's the best process for that. That's either here or there, but you're at least, that outlet is in some type of peer review format. Other people are seeing it. It's not all podcasts may be the same. I think that Rick and I pride ourselves on doing our best to share the most factual information and the most behavior analytic responses as we go, but others may not. And I think that might be some of the factors that have said, all right, well, maybe they're not getting the right, they being supervisees are not getting the right guidance because this material isn't confirmed or has gone through any type of validation. That's was my thought. Rick, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I have no decent analysis that I could share. I don't even want to speculate because the BACB will do things, and I wish I know if you, they try to communicate in many different ways, but sometimes they'll do things and the communication isn't there. And this is one of those instances. So I'm hoping to see that they come out and provide more detail around why this might be the case. Again, speculating, maybe I thought it's because there's such a diversity of podcasts and so many people are there that maybe there's just such a variation content out there that they thought that this doesn't work for supervision. But then I thought that's probably not a good rationale, because then why wouldn't they apply that, as you were saying, Christina, to just podcasts in general? So that's probably not right. Then I started thinking, I don't know why.
Maybe I'm sitting here and I have podcasts on, but I'm not really listening to them. And then so I'm just saying, oh, I listened to 32 podcasts and that was 32 hours.
Similarly, in that same update, they specified that a conference attendance no longer counts towards supervised field work for people who are not yet certified. My thought, though, is that there should be multiple. If it's worth CEUs, there's one layer of potential oversight because you have to become an ACE provider, and there's very specific directions as to what ACE, what content can award CEUs. And so there's that. And then if someone's in supervision, their supervisor should also be looking at what they're doing. And if their sheet says podcast, like that would be 7 red flags to me as a supervisor. But I really haven't been able to figure it out. And it sounds like you all have the same questions I do.
I'd argue we're worth listening to, regardless if you get hours
I would
or
too.
not.
I used to send people your way all the time and say, hey, you have these great questions about measurement. I have answered them at a B+ level. Go listen to someone who's on their A game. Go listen to Doug and Rick. But now I can't do that unless my supervisee is, interested in doing that, not for hours, which some are. I've got a good group. So
social media is going to continue to dominate in the near future, and how people obtain their supervision, this is going to it's going to keep happening. If you all have been following the whole AI space, who hasn't, if you're online, there are avatars now that can be put up there. You can program these avatars to think. Like, I'll go on YouTube sometimes and I know this is AI, but I'm still watching it because it's good. The production values are good. The voice is pleasant. And I don't know that that's happening in our field right now, but very well that can be happening pretty soon. So I wonder how, as these new things with technology are going to come out, how's that going to affect getting supervision hours? Would that count? Like if I'm a BCBA and I write a transcript and then I have an avatar, is that going to count for hours or does it not count for hours? So there's all of these interesting things that the BACB is going to have to contend with because technology keeps changing and the way we communicate, the different resources that are out there are going to change, and it's going to affect us in our field.
Absolutely. I do not envy the decision makers at the BACB to weigh, in their role of having to weigh all of this diverse information.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It is.
Well, that brings us to our final word, and that word is podcast.
All right. 3 fabulous secret words. A very good conversation. Christina, thank you for asking those questions. This was fun. I enjoyed the conversation and being asked questions. I've always thought that asking good questions is an art, and you asked really good questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you. This was a treat. Thank you so much.
Well, that'll do it for all of us here today. Thank you all for listening to ABA On Call. Thank you for being part of ABA On Call. Want to grab your CEU? Just click the link in the instructions, complete the quiz, enter the secret words, and pay the fee to download your certificate. You've done the work, claim the credit. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.